Some of the people that I met there, and I've always had fond memories of, were people like Gregory Peck and Ingrid Bergman, Alida Valley, Rhonda Fleming, Joseph Cotton, Lionel Barrymore. Yeah, Mr. Selznick was a habitual, he was habitually late for his appointments. And no matter when he had an appointment, you could count on him being late. So I would pick him up at his home on Summit Drive in Beverly Hills. And the shortest route would take us down to Motor Avenue here. We would get off, we'd come through Cheviot Hills and get off at Washington Boulevard and Motor. And so each time we would take that route, there was a dip in the road at one particular spot. And every time I slowed down, he would say, Dan, he said, why do you slow down every time we get here? I said, because there's a dip in the road. And if I continue at the same speed, I'm afraid that you might hit your head on the top of the car, on the roof of the car. So he said, well, don't slow down. He said, you know I'm late. He said, I have an appointment and I'm late. He said, so let's go. So the next morning was the same thing. I would slow down. So finally, this went on for 3 or 4 days in a row. And then finally, before we left his home, he said, now, I want you to get there as soon as possible and don't slow down. So when we got to that particular section of the highway, the road there on Motor Avenue, I didn't decrease my speed. And he hit the top of his head against the roof of the car. And he says, what in the heck are you trying to do, kill me? And I said, no. I said, I told you that that spot was there, and I was afraid that this would happen in the past. He said, well, get going. He said, don't ever do that again. So from then on, I didn't pay any attention to him. I would always slow down. Okay, the way I decided to run for city council was I had sold a property to a gentleman. Later, he decided he wanted to use it for a purpose which required a zone variance. The attorney made the presentation before the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission denied it, 5-0. Then he came back to me. He said, Dan, he said, I'd like to appeal, but I want you to represent me before the city council. And we appeared before the city council. And after it was all over, the city council completely overturned the Planning Commission recommendation, which was for denial, and they approved it. 5 was a unanimous vote. And he said, Dan, he says, you ought to be sitting up on that city council. He said, well, he said, you know, he said, you were able to convince that council to overturn the Planning Commission's recommendations. He said, that just doesn't happen. So the next day I got a call from the manager of the Chamber of Commerce. He wanted to have lunch with me, so at lunch he said, Dan, we have an election coming up next April. He said, I think you should run for city council. I thought, boy, that's strange. You got 2 days in a row here. No one ever asked me that before. You know, I don't think I would be interested. I'm too busy. I was vice president of the state of California Real Estate Association at the time. So one night I was standing at the bar with 2 or 3 friends at the Elks Lodge, of which I'm a charter member. And a gentleman walked up to me and he said, Dan, I'm certainly happy to know that you decided not to run for city council. And of course, I was curious to know why. I said, why? Why are you glad that I'm not going to run? Because everybody's urging me to run. And he said, well, he says, there are 3 reasons. He said, number 1, you wouldn't have a chance. And I said, why wouldn't I have a chance? He said, well, he said, number 1, he said, you're Catholic. Number 2, you're of Italian extraction. There's never been one elected to the city council before. Well, that part I thought was true. Number 3, you have a name that nobody could pronounce. Anyway, he's going on and on. So by the time the third one, reason came up, I said, wait a minute. I said, you just changed my mind. I said, I'm going to run. I'm going to show you that I can do it. And that's how that happened.